Stand by for broadcast.
You're listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations.
Hello, I'm Squadron Leader Peter Lisney, and in this episode we hear why every reservist needs to be a warfighter.
We need more of the branch and trades to really think, and the AOCs and the capabilities to really think about how they might use reserves and could they build resilience into their organisations. So how much are we prepared to adapt as a force, as a service, to allow the reserves to be able to play its part? Some areas, that's happening really well. In some areas, I'm not convinced that we're thinking enough. We need everybody to play their part in this warfighting operational mindset, RAF, Rocka for the future.
Also, in this episode, we'll reheat a few stories just in case you missed them, and we'll be finding out who is under the hat this week.
The best task and deployed on would be Op Polar Bear, helping alongside the evacuation from Sudan. It was very rewarding.
Find out who is under the hat at the end of this episode. Now, in 2021, the government published a list of recommendations in the Reserve Forces Review 2030, but less than a year later, Russia invaded Ukraine. What happened to RAF 30? How will RAF Reservists be affected? And what does it mean for the wider Royal Air Force? I spoke with the head of the RAF Reserves to find some answers. Air Vice-Marshal Ranald Munro, Commandant General of the Royal Auxiliary Air Force. Welcome to Inside Air.
Thank you.
Really good to have you back because in 2021 we had a chat, and I'd encourage any reservists listening to tune into episode 14, which was RAF Reserves, Reality and Future. We went into a lot of depth on that day about some of the opportunities and some of the queries within reserve service, so we're not going to repeat any of that, so have a listen to episode 14. What I'd like to do to start is if you can just give us a picture of where reserves are today in terms of how many reservists are there in the Royal Air Force, where are they currently serving, and maybe some idea of how many get mobilised.
Actually, it's worth explaining, I think, who the RAF are and the wider RAF Reserves. So if I just give you some numbers to start with, the RAF PTVRs are just shy of 2,000, and we've been flatlining for a number of years now at about 2,000. If you add on the VER, ADC and FTRS, you get to sort of, and also those in training, you get up to just over the 3,000 mark, thereabouts. But of course, if you then add on the wider reserves, typically FTRS or ADC, not in the RAF, or doing workforce substitutions somewhere else in the RAF, you're up to just shy of the 5,000 mark. So it depends what you call reserves. But I think for these purposes, let's talk about the RAF and the PTVRs in particular. And of them, we're organised into 31 squadrons around the country. Most are on inside the wire on bases, but there are, I think, 4 of our squadrons that are outside the wire, the rest are inside the wire. And we are pretty much spread across most trades, not all trades, about 50% of the trades the reserves have access to, and that's something I'm trying to expand with the team, is to make sure we have access to all the trades that can contribute. And of that cohort, somewhere around about 53%, although this last year, 56% of our RSDs, reserve service days, were spent on output, not just training. And typically on an annual basis, 500 to 700 of our PTVRs are mobilised supporting the RAF around the world. So if you look around the world, pretty much wherever the RAF is, either an air exercise or on operations, you will have reservists there. So we are absolutely deeply embedded, typically as IAs, individual augmentation, across the RAF, providing support.
So how do you spot a PTVR, a part-time volunteer reservist, when they're mobilised?
Well, do you know, that's really hard because they wear the same uniform, and very quickly when they're doing a job either on an air exercise, in an office or in operations, people don't know they're reservists. So quite often I get people saying, oh, we don't have reserves. And you say, well, actually, those 3 people over there are reserves. And they often don't know they're reserves, which I think is a testament to their professionalism. I think very often the way you can tell they're a reservist, they have a story beyond the RAF. It's the civilian stories and life experiences. Quite often, when people then find out who they are and they ask those questions, they have not richer, they have a different lifestyle, career profile, and very often very exciting, interesting jobs that actually the regulars like to hear about.
Yeah, one of our great squadrons, 4624, the Movers. If you've ever deployed anywhere in the world, there's a very good chance you would have been supported by a reservist who was mobilised.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when we spoke a couple of years ago, we talked about the Reserve Forces Review 2030. Where are we at with RF30?
RF30, again, if I can take one step before that, we were on our transformation programme within the RAF, and our transformation programme was called initially Astra Reserve Optimisation, now Air Reserve Optimisation. And that was our journey, the reserve journey to the next generation Air Force, to make sure that we were continuing to be relevant, capable and usable to the RAF. And then RF30 happened, and this was an idea of the last CDS, Chief of Defence Staff, Sir Nick Carter, who said, I need to get reserves back on the radar again. And that was RF30. And he had the then MINAF, Minister of Armed Forces, who was actually a one-star brigadier in the Army Reserve, now a two-star, Mark Lancaster, now Lord Lancaster, to run that programme. So we got very heavily involved with him, and we, through somebody called Andrew Walters, who works for me within the RAF, he was our liaison officer, and he heavily shaped RF30. So we were very deeply involved in RF30, which came up with I think 18 recommendations, a very good bit of work. We were very happy with it, but I think it took a long time not to write it, but for that then to land through Parliament and go through the processes and approvals and all the rest of it. Long and short of it is, RF30 to some extent has now been subsumed by what is now being called Defence Reserves Campaign Plan. That takes most, if not all, of RF30 and its recommendations and ideas, but puts into a new context now, which is obviously Ukraine, Israel, Yemen. These things have changed the picture, and the Defence Reserve Campaign Plan is refreshing that to bring it right bang up to speed and focusing on the war-fighting elements, if you like, of reserves. For example, the Strategic Reserve. How will we use ex-regulars, now called the Strategic Reserve? So RF30 was a good bit of work. It hasn't been lost. It's just been subsumed into a new bit of work now, which is, as I say, run in the centre by the Reserve Forces and Cadets, who look after the tri-service reserves, and it's now called Defence Reserves Campaign Plan, which we will again contribute to.
It sounds like one of those cases where the planning is more important than the plan.
Yes, and that's often the case. Actually thinking about it, talking about it, fleshes out all sorts of new ideas, and that's exactly what's happened. But it will be important, and this is really, really important. And what we're finding in our work in the RAF, our Air Reserve Optimisation programme that we're doing is you've got to start delivering. You've got to start executing on the plans. Otherwise, it takes too long. People go off the boil. It loses credibility. You have to move quite quickly to make change stick.
One of the things I was going to ask you was what has been the impact on RF30 of Ukraine?
It has had a big effect. Again, if I provide a bigger picture, there's a quote out there that says that, and this is an Army quote, but it applies, I think, to all three services. Armies don't change unless they're defeated or they're told to by politicians. Very often we don't do things to ourselves because we want to. We're almost forced upon us. There has to be a driver. And RF30, I think, happened bear in mind, FR20, Future Reserves 2020, was a manifesto commitment by the Conservative Party to grow the reserves. So that was painful. But we were told to change, and we did change. And I think we were more successful than the other two services in terms of getting our numbers up. RF30 was in a context almost post-Afghanistan, post-Iraq, where, I know reserves are important, but, what are they really going to be doing, and why do we need them? I think what has happened now with what's happened in terms of Ukraine and other flashpoints around the world is, we probably will need reserves. Again, there's a saying out there, the Vice Chief has mentioned in the past, Vice Chiefs of Defence Staff, regulars start wars, reserves finish them. You run out very quickly, you run out of regulars. And it's not just because of battle casualty replacements, but it's actually because if it's not over by Christmas, where's the relief coming from? Where's the roulement coming from? Plus on top of that, new skills and different skills that you need. And so I think the context now is this is real again. where reserves are going to be a big part of the whole force. We always knew that, but we sort of forgotten about it. And I think RAF 30, the flashpoints around the world, most notably Ukraine, has now brought that front and centre. This is real again. If you look at the other countries, our NATO allies, and I know there's a difference, not least geography and history, but our NATO allies are exponentially increasing their size of their reserves. And yet in the UK, we're kind of still just chatting about it. Now, we in the RAF, I think, knew that and we recognised we need to increase the size of the reserves. But even now, I think the numbers we're talking about they're significant, but they're not exponential increase. I think what's going to could happen, especially if things, develop in the way, in a negative way around the world, we might have to suddenly have to increase our reserves significantly. If you look at this Chief of General Staff, Sir Patrick Saunders, just the other day, talking about, we might need to start thinking about involving societies and a citizen army. And well, he's got one. It's called the Army Reserve. Why not use that to expand that organisation? And of course, we're looking also at a national defence plan. I think we're one of 3 or 4 NATO allies that don't have a national defence plan. Well, Phil Robinson, AVM Phil Robinson, has been tasked to do that. And I've seen the first paper; it looks really good. To how do we make sure that we actually go back to thinking about fighting from the full, the UK, as opposed to expeditionary in sandy places, and how do we then involve society generally in that?
So there's 2 cohorts of people that need to be thinking about this, and it's our regulars and it's our PTVRs. How can regulars employ reservists, and what do reservists need to do to prepare for that call?
I mean, that's a big question. If I break that down, first of all, are we thinking enough in the RAF about how we could use reserves at the heads of profession, branch and trade level? The answer in some areas, yes, we are. As Churchill said, gentlemen, we've run out of money, we now need to think. Is that thinking happening? How could we use reserves? And bear in mind, if you want to unleash the potential of reserves, think of them as a plug, the socket's got to adapt. So how much are we prepared to adapt as a force, as a service, to allow the reserves to be able to play its part? Some areas, that's happening really well. In some areas, I'm not convinced that we're thinking enough. We keep doing what we've been doing. I hadn't really thought about reserves. It's too difficult, reserves. We can't train them. The currency levels. Okay, but could we do it differently? And it is starting to change. The Deputy Chief of the Air Staff, Air Marshal Lloyd, for example, in the context of ACE, and I'll come on to ACE in a minute, Agile Combat Employment and Dynamic Force Employment, if you look at those areas, he's saying, do you know what, we might need to go back to what we used to do and multi-skill people. So rather than saying it's a profession, it's all too difficult, can you break a profession down into tasks? And so you might be a regular or a reserve analyst, but can we train you to refill a Typhoon or an F-35 or rearm it? And the answer is yes, we can. And that's the flexibility of our workforce that we're going to have to get to. So it requires both the regular component, the heads of profession, the branch and trades, and the air officer commanding the groups to go, how else might we use reserves? What do we need to do to unleash that potential? Can we train a different way? Can we break this role into tasks? But it does require, on the flip side, reserves, PTVR, and FTRS to think, do you know what, we need also to be more flexible. It's what the Chief talks about Bergen ready. So if the klaxon goes on a Friday afternoon, grab your Bergen, you're off. I think we've lost that culture across the armed services, not just the RAF, but we need to re-inculcate that thinking that every single person is a warfighter. Nobody can sit there in an office going, no, that's not me, I'm not the warfighter. No, everybody in that chain is a warfighter that's contributing to an output, to deliver on operations.
I think particularly because previously you weren't warfighting in the UK. It wasn't until you went down to Bryce and got on an aircraft and flew off somewhere hot and sandy. But that's not the case necessarily today. I'm just going to go back a little bit. We talked about what was necessary, but can I ask, what is the consequence of our commanders not asking the question about how can a reserve fill this gap or plug this hole?
It probably means more pressure on the regular component. It means not having the resilience that we need to have, the flexibility we need to have, the new skills, especially the sunrise capabilities of space, coding, data analytics. We won't attract that into the RAF. So there's a massive consequence there. Again, going back to the chief, I'm using his mantra. We're here to fly to fight. We've got to get back to an operational mindset. So everybody sees themselves as a warfighter with a warfighting ethos, Bergen ready. But he then goes on to say, it means we need to get more out of our people, more out of our platforms, and a different relationship with risk. And more out of our people does not mean fragging our people. It means using all of the whole force, contractors, civil servants, reserves, and really think about how they could contribute to that warfighting effort. Whereas right now, we tend, in many areas, just think of the regular component, and that's it. And that's a real failure, both in terms of integrating our reserves, in terms of thinking how we might train things better, how we might be able to use them, either backfilling or going out and doing front line. So there's a big, and that's a massive cultural mind shift that I think we're starting to go through right now. Even when we talked about ACE, and I know we'll come on to ACE in a minute, ACE isn't just about people moving around and deploying and where they go. It's a huge shift in your mentality and your mindset about why we're here, and every single person being ready to pick up that Bergen up and go and deploy, irrespective of your terms and conditions of service.
Yeah, so that's an important point. So let's assume that the commanders make use and exploit the assets of and what the reserves can deliver, or at least what they think they can deliver. Where does this leave a PTVR reservist who's got a civilian day job as well? What happens if they don't prepare?
People join the RAF for different reasons, but generally speaking, it's supporting the nation, doing something useful. But often it's personal development, experiences which only the military can give. But then it's the quality of the guys and girls you serve with, the values and standards, the ethos, that sense of belonging, and you're part of history rather than reading about it. You're actually doing stuff that's part of history, whether it's op pitting or it's Iraq or Afghanistan or Azatize or Biloxi. You are there doing stuff. When I talk to reserves, the PTVR reserves, and all the RAF staff squadrons, I think they're animated and excited about what's coming, because they want to play their part in the whole force, contributing to the RAF. So I think that mindset shift will not take long for them to understand what it is that we're trying to do with the RAF staff. And what they need to do then is say, be prepared, not just to be a specialist in their area, into analyst, loggy, or regiment, or police, but actually be prepared to also think about other tasks that they might have to do to be part of this agile force that we need to deploy, for example, on ACE. Okay. Now, what that does require, I think, is a very careful preparation of employers. Not least when we talk about mobilising the strategic reserve, the ex-regulars, we now call them strategic reserve. And this is all part of the Agile Stance campaign plan, Iridium, as we call it in the RAF. That requires society to understand what's about to happen, because a lot of people out there, ex-regulars, don't know that they have a residual liability to serve. And employers, many of them, don't know that these ex-regulars, the strategic reserve, have a residual liability to serve. So there's a preparation for that, and employees understanding. Likewise with PTVRs, if we suddenly get a phone call saying, it's almost like the Army call it an RNLI app. Your phone goes saying, you're mobilised. You've got to get yourself, to XYZ ASAP. If that happens, employees need to understand that this is a national effort. And I think in a national effort, people understand that we're all playing our part at this point. And this is why I know the centre are talking about this thing about total force. How do we get the whole of society to realise that whole of society, defence isn't just a military thing, it's a societal thing. They understand that in Finland and Estonia because of their history and their geography, but we need to get our people in the UK into that mindset that, defence is everybody's business. So when somebody gets called away as a reservist, PTVR or a mobilised ex-regular strategic reserve, this is part of the national effort. And everybody's part of it.
Now, recently there was a quarterly reserves all ranks briefing, and I was very impressed. If we've got a couple of thousand PTVRs, 1/10 of them were on that call. It was about 230 people on the call. At the very end of the call, there was a bit of a question, a reach out. What would you like to hear in the future? something that kept on coming up was ACE, Agile Combat Employment. So our PTVRs want to know what role they play in ACE.
Right, and right now it is under discussion. 11 Group is leading that discussion as to what does ACE actually look like for the regulars and the reserves. We are contributing to that discussion, so there's nothing definitive that's come out of that. But ACE is about, again, rediscovering what we used to know. It's about camouflage, concealment, deception. It's all these things that we used to do and bring it back into our psyche again. The simplest way to explain it, I suppose, is this. Until certainly post-Cold War, we have been designed for efficiency, which means we're at 5 operating bases because it's just much more efficient. But that doesn't make us resilient. All the eggs are in one basket. So what happens if loss amount gets taken out? The air component is the easy bit. It just flies to another runway somewhere, and that's work that we're working on now. And it could be another military runway, it could be a civilian runway. Take the extreme, it could even be a motorway. Okay, which is what our American and our continental European allies have done. But if you do that, who's on the ground to receive it, refuel it, rearm it? And that's where the people bit of ACE is going to come in, and that's where reserves could play a really important part. But one, because it's geography, but actually because our people could be reskilled to do that, and they could be part of turnaround teams. Now, I have a vision, and it is a vision at this stage, because we don't know what the plan is going to be, but I have a vision where, as we found in COVID, a lot of our people do like deploying, not just as individual augmentees, which is what they normally do, and nothing wrong with that, but actually they did like going on COVID on a windy car park somewhere in Manchester with their own force element, their own corporal, their own sergeant, with their own command and control. And I have a personal vision where if we get this right and we get a squadron, Rourke South Squadron, train a third to be refuelers, a third to be rearmers, and a third to do something, whatever we need them to do, and you mobilise the squadron. You mobilise that squadron, it goes out with all of its chain of command, not as IAs, the whole squadron goes out somewhere to plug in, and it could then either together with the regulars or under its own steam, under its own command and control, it then receives some of the aircraft and it refuels and rearms and all the rest of it. But then you have to make, who's going to be rearming, who's going to refuel. And that's work, I'm sure, that's one way of doing it. I think that is quite a neat way of doing it and gives a real Rourke South squadron a real war role with everybody having a sort of secondary duties under that. Of course, we have to make sure there's enough inter-analysts or loggies to do their primary jobs held back. But I think reserves want to do that, and I think we, the service, want to be people to be cross-skilled to be able to do secondary tasks.
Something else that reservists are employed on a regular basis is backfilling. So if a regular service person is deployed overseas, then you might find a reservist goes in to fill that, do that job for that person in their absence for 6 months or so. Do you think we're going to see more of that going forward?
I think we'll see more of everything going forward, because we can't do what we need to do as an Air Force without reserves, and I think that's going to become even more stark as we start preparing for conflicts and becoming more resilient and thinking about war fighting. But let's be clear though, reserves don't just want to do backfill, but the benefit of reserves is, bear in mind, they at least hit 2 of the principles of war: flexibility and resilience. That's what reserves provide us as a service. And if that means backfill. If it means going forward fighting, it means going forward. If it means IAs, it means IAs. If it means going as a flight or as a squadron, we should be able to do all of those things and not just train for one very, very specific thing, limit the training just to do backfill, which is not exciting for reservists because they're here to learn, they want challenging, progressive, realistic training, and they want opportunities to deploy. Yes, backfill or forward, and feel they're doing something useful. If we limit their training to just to do one minor task or one type task, that will not keep them, sustain them, and the retention will not, will go down. But the benefit of reserves is you should be able to use them for pretty much all those things. We'll never get it right in our design, but as long as it's close enough, and we can top it up for what we actually need them to do.
So this all sounds like we're going to need numbers here that our numbers are going to be uplifting over the next few years. Is that a fair thing to say?
I mean, right now in the campaign, the answer is yes. In the campaign plan right now, we're supposed to be at 3,200 and something 50 by 2029. Right now, we're supposed to be at 3,100 and something. That's in the campaign plan right now. And that was based on some work. It might have been a bit of a finger in the air, but there was some work around about FR20 time to figure out what do we actually need. Because we were told to grow then, if you remember, by politicians, grow the reserves, and the RAS was, okay, how do we grow them? That was the genesis of the FR20 squadrons, the GSS squadrons, General Service Support Squadrons, and bear in mind we're at 2,000 and flatlining. In fact, just recently we've dipped down below the 2,000. So we have headroom to grow from 2,000 to 3,250 right now. Now, I think as we go forward, bear in mind who reserves are and why. We want to grow the size of our reserves because fixed costs, variable costs, reserves are variable cost. They can bring new skills to bear that we need, and we've never got the money we'd like to have. So reserves will increasingly become an important part of the whole force, and that's why numbers are important. But it isn't just numbers for numbers' sake. It's numbers with the trades that we want them to engage in. Again, right now we have access to about 50% of the trades that are out there. Why not 100%? Why, if we can have PTVR Typhoon pilots, is it really beyond the wit of man to think about how we might have more PTVRs in logs or INT or the regiment or the police? The answer is no. We just need to think. Going back to my comment earlier, we just need to think more than perhaps we are doing now.
So you talked about growing the RAF. Where is that growth coming from?
Growth in the RAF will come from the heads of profession, the AOCs and the capability sponsors. We consider that we have a strategic demand signal for growth. You are to grow the reserves. Why? We haven't got the money that we'd like to have, therefore fixed cost, variable cost, reserves are variable cost, and we need new skills. So we have the strategic demand signal for growth, especially now moving into warfighting scenario. We need that extra resilience. What we haven't got everywhere are the operational demand signals. And what I mean by that is we haven't got enough of the AOCs, the capability sponsors, and the heads of profession saying that they need more reserves. Some are, and some are saying, yeah, we need more INT, we need more cyber, we need more padres. So we're helping them get those numbers. But we need more of the branch and trades to really think, and the AOCs and the capabilities to really think about how they might use reserves and could they build resilience into their organisations. So we've got the strategic demand signal for growth. We're trying to generate more of the operational demand signals. And that growth will come from thickening in the trades we're in now, because we need more resilience, not just one man, one woman thick. We need more resilience, especially when we start talking about war fighting. It'll come from access to the 50% of trades we don't have access to, because some of the branch and trades just think, oh, it's all too difficult, poor loves can't possibly do it. Well, what are you doing to adapt, to allow the reserves to be able to generate an output for you? And the third element will be the sunrise capabilities that we think we will lead in. We know we will lead in. So space, cyber, data analytics, coding, because we're bringing people in, a bit like doctors, they're already trained. That's what they do in the civilian life, and we bring them in, and that's been successful. But don't underestimate also where reserves can play a part in maintaining sunset capabilities. Until recently, Russian speakers were not required. We kept them in the reserves. And funny old thing, they are rock stars right now for obvious reasons. So we're a place where we can maintain people, fixed cost, variable cost. You don't need to pay them full time, but keep them in the reserve somewhere just in case you need them. And then pour water on, add heat, and you've got the reservists ready to go. So that's where the growth's coming from. Strategic demand signal, but we need more operational demand signals. Thickening of the trades we're in now, access to 50% trades we don't have access to, but also sunrise capabilities.
So what you're saying is because of the strategic signal that you have to grow, you've got funding to generate reserves.
Yes.
So your door is open to requests on that front?
Exactly that. We're looking for people to come to us, and some of the heads of profession and trades are coming to us and saying, do you know what? We want a new medical capability, and we want to recruit in a different area. So we're looking right now at a new medical capability, standing up a new squadron based on an Army Reserve Centre in the Midlands. Fantastic. We're at 2,000 PTVRs right now. We're supposed to be at 3,150. We've got gaps, and it's in the command plan. And I'm told if it's in the command plan, it's funded.
I know that there will be some PTVRs listening to this, shouting at the smartphone, saying, "Yeah, just let them stay longer," because last year there was a tightening on the rules about normal retirement age. So those that reach 60, it's time to say goodbye. What would be your answer to that, to just extend that normal retirement age?
As you rightly say, it's a very emotive subject, NRA and the 60. I mean, what I would say is this. First of all, there is a debate within the MOD right now to talk about raising the retirement age across all three services, regular and reserve. There's a discussion ongoing. It will not generate an answer overnight, I suspect. Because there'll be all sorts of stuff tied up with pensions and other things all tied up to with that. But what I would say to the RAF is this. First of all, we are the oldest by far of the other two services in terms of our terms and conditions service. We allow people to serve to 60 as a PTVR, whereas the Army is 55, for example. Royal Marine, I think it's 45. So we are already way beyond the other two services in terms of how long we allow people to serve. The second thing I would say is where you are a deep specialist, you are the Russian translator for the Prime Minister, or you are a deeply swept cyber person. We are absolutely going to look at you and say, look, we need to keep you on because you have exquisite skills. We want to keep you on. If you take the other end of that spectrum, okay, and say, okay, as I've had before, OCs saying to me, and I think the OCs need to have a bit more moral courage here, rather than just saying yes to their people and allow Group Captain Bev and her team, Bev Peart and her team, to be the bad cop. The OCs need to take some responsibility and have some moral courage. If you have somebody, and I've had this before, who is an aviator for 20 years, doesn't want to promote, nothing wrong with that. Not everybody wants to be a warrant officer or a flight sergeant or a two-star. I get that. You want to be 20 years on a squadron as an aviator, and you've done it for 20 years, and you want to stay on because you're still fit, okay, and you want to keep serving, and yet the OC is telling me that he or she is turning away people at the base rank level because we haven't got gaps. Well, that's not right. You can't turn people away when somebody wants to stay, but actually is not an exquisite skill. Yes, they're useful, but you're turning people away at the bottom end. And all we're doing is pushing everybody to the cliff edge of a very, very old cohort. What we should be doing is focusing much more on the recruiting side and retention, both. But right now, it's all about, let's keep people. But what about recruiting? What about the new people coming in? The lifeblood. Those new people might want to be a warrant officer in due course, and or a two-star. So there's a real balance. The difficulty comes sometimes where you get people in the middle going, there are gaps, and I don't want to leave yet. And that's where we have to have some discussion about what role they're going to play, what the squadron is doing in terms of its sustainability going forward, recruiting people. I know it's emotive, but bear in mind, and this is the key thing, we're moving back to a situation where we're not just giving individual augmentation, a few people every year that go out, and it's not significant, 500 to 700. We need to go back to what the RAF want us to be, which is a war-fighting RAF squadrons. And that means everybody in that squadron stand fast to cyber people. Okay, everybody in that squadron, FTRS, ADC, PTVR, need to prepare to deploy on ACE or whatever we need them to do. Going back to the Chief's comment, we need to get more out of our people. We need everybody to play their part in this warfighting operational mindset, RAF for the future. One thing I wouldn't mind mentioning, because we mentioned the Defence Reserves campaign plan, but bear in mind the RAF, I think, has been very forward-leaning. and allowed my team to be built, the Reserve Directorate, and to go after what we initially called Astro Reserve Optimization, but now Air Reserve Optimization. How do we grow the RAF? In what capabilities? In what locations? What TCOS do we need? More modular training. How do we unleash the potential of the reserves? And how do we develop a platform that allows us to grow without exponentially increasing the size of the permanent staff? So we created RSWs, Reserve Support Wings, that provide the real-life support to squadrons. So squadrons can focus on the output, what they're there to do, without all the housekeeping stuff, whether it's recruiting or phase one training or initial key issue, allow an organisation, the RSWs, to do that. So they've been great success. We stood 4 up. They're all at IOC. We haven't handed any of them over yet to 2 Group. I've agreed with the AOC 2 Group. This will be conditions based. That we are ready with all that. We're content that they've got the people, the OC, the XO, and also enough people in the squadron, in the wing, to hand over. We don't want to give them a hospital pass, but we also want to make sure that 2 Group understands what they're getting and what they're going to be used for. We have a habit sometimes in the RAF of repurposing what we get, as opposed to using it for which it was designed, and that's the comfort level that we're yet to achieve with 2 Group. We're nearly there, not quite. But also squadron structures paper, which we've been signed off by EXCO, which will be about, what are the permanent staff on a squadron there to do, and what are the design principles that lead you to how many there should be? Because no one size will fit all. Geography will play a part. Multi-trade versus single trade. What trade? But we need to have that discussion, because the FDRS, the permanent staff, regular and FDRS, are so important to us because they provide the framework around which you build the RAF squadron. The question is, they're so, how many do we need? Because they're so important. Could we use some of them to grow other squadrons and place them elsewhere in the RAF, so we're truly integrated across 1 Group, 2 Group, 22 Group, 11 Group, rather than being focused all at squadron level, which is what we are now. We're a field force that looks like the TA of the 1980s I joined. It's a field force, and we want to really integrate FDRS and PTVR, new PTVR roles, to grow warrant officers, grow warrant officers commissioning, and grow our own 2-star from within. That's the vision that we have going forward, but it does mean change, and not everybody likes change. And my team tell me, and we have success. We've been moving on a broad front, but we reckon we'd be at least a year, if not 18 months ahead of where we are now, if we didn't have to fight house to house, street to street, all the time, trying to generate change, which it should not be that difficult. But change is difficult, and a lot of people are sort of putting digging their heels in and going, yeah, but it doesn't suit me. And we need to get back to having service as the forefront of our ethos. People are important, but it's delivering for the service. And what do we need to do? What do we all need to do to adapt what we do to achieve an outcome for the RAF?
For our regular colleagues who are perhaps approaching the last few years of regular service, what are the opportunities for our ex-regulars to come in, join in the PTVR role?
Well, again, the vision we have and Defence has is that rather than leaving the service, you stay on in another capacity. So you don't leave the regular component and you join the reserves. You just move from one TCOS to another TCOS, terms and conditions of service. So I would certainly advocate any regular leaving. Do look at the reserves, either in an FDRS capacity, that suits you and it suits us, or in a PTVR capacity, and say, look, I've got another job, but I still want to remain connected. I still want the value standards and the ethos, the sense of belonging, the opportunities to deploy. I want to be part of the organisation, which you can do as a PTVR. And bear in mind, as a PTVR, you're serving on your terms. Our job is to make sure we're big enough to make sure there's enough people still to be able to do things. And I might come on to that in a minute before you finish. 4624 is a prime example. So any regular leaving, I would absolutely say, we don't want to lose your SQEP, we don't want to lose your experience and your knowledge. Please do think about the reserves in either an FDRS capacity or a PTVR capacity, because we will definitely be able to use you. somewhere in this organisation. And why size matters, and this is really important, Peter. And I think we do this better than the other two services, where we make routine use of our reserves, so not just break glass in emergency, but routine use. I mentioned earlier, 56% last year of our RSDs, reserve service days, was spent on output, not just training. 4624, and you mentioned them earlier, really good example. All three, the other two services look at that and go, wow, that's fantastic. But to be assured of their capability, surely they must be on ADC and FTRS contracts. Well, number one, it's expensive, it's not agile, and it's not what they want. The reason they can deliver that output, and bear in mind they deliver tasks during the week, weekends, and have 2 standing tasks, the reason they can do that is because they're 3 times the size of any other squadron. They've always got enough people, and part of the permanent staff is there. Munro, can you do Tuesday? No, but I could do Wednesday. Oh, all right then. As long as you're big enough, you've got more people for warfighting, more people connecting the nation, more people with COVID, but also people in steady state who routinely can provide support. Nobody likes to pay an insurance policy you never use. Well, here's an insurance policy that you actually are using because you're big enough to have people who say, yeah, I'll do those tasks without actually breaking glass and mobilising them, and they can still have a day job. And you're not. Another way of putting it is, rather than telling Munro to give up his day job and pay him, 5 RSDs a week, you're paying 5 people 1 RSD a week to do that same job. This is my point, and you asked the question earlier. If a regular thinks about that, or the capability thinks about that, saying, gee, what, is that what I need to do to adapt, to allow that to happen? Rather than saying, no, it's black and white, I want someone full-time, end of. Well, you're going to get, you're limiting the talent that we can bring into this organisation.
2024 marks the 100th anniversary of the Royal Auxiliary Air Force under various names, actually, through those 100 years. How will this milestone be commemorated?
Well, first of all, it will be commemorated, which is fantastic, and the RAF have absolutely signed up to that. It won't be RAF 100 because we just haven't got the workforce to do that. So what we're doing is we definitely will commemorate it. There are Andy Callum and Gavin Hellard as well in 2 Group are front and centre of organising this. Howard Leader on the marketing side is, again, on the comms side is leaning into it. So what we've decided to do as a strategy is where we keep doing what we've been doing every year, but put a RAF 100 label on it, retitle it if you like. So it's not new, already doing it, squadrons are already doing it, but retitle it, repurpose it to RAF 100. But we have added some new things into it. So if the ones that come off them into mind is a parade of all the RAF squadron standards at Buckingham Palace, consecration of new squadron and families day, hopefully at Windsor Castle, but it might be somewhere else. We yet to get confirmation. We have a new quick march, which is fantastic. A Clements Dane service as well for the RAF. So what we're doing is repurposing some of the stuff we do every year anyway, with a few added things on top. And not least, just next week, for example, we've got a combined Honorary Air Commodore and OC and Warrant Officers Conference. Normally they're separate. It's combined this year at Cranwell, the home of the RAF, with the first visit by our new Air Commodore-in-Chief, the Duke of Gloucester, who took over from her late Majesty. So, there's a start again, RAF 100, saying, yeah, we're doing it differently because to remark that this is a big year for us. But bear in mind, and this is something the Air and Space Commander is he's keen on, we're keen on as well, Harv Smith, Air Marshal Harv Smith, is use this to raise the profile of the reserves, the RAF and the RAF Reserve generally, for recruiting purposes, not least. So people know who we are, what we do, so we can actually use this as a platform to recruit people into the RAF Reserve.
So finally, just to draw this to a close, looking forward, what would you like to see happen to the Royal Auxiliary Air Force over the next 5 years? What would you like to see?
5 years' time, I would like to see a bigger RAF. I'd like to see a better integrated RAF across the whole of the RAF. I'd like to see more PTVRs. I'd like to see better use of our permanent staff across new squadrons, bigger squadrons, but also across the whole of the RAF, truly integrated across the RAF. More career opportunities for PTVRs and them. And also, I think I'd like to see a RAF that is truly respected by the RAF, and it's understood by the RAF, but both the RAF, but also wider society. So if I put that in a nutshell, bigger RAF, a bigger component being PTVR, better use of our FTRS community, permanent staff community, new opportunities for PTVR sprinkled across the whole of the RAF, better integrated into the RAF, access to 100% of the trades, and truly designed into the whole force. We talk about whole force by design. I'm not sure we are there yet. So we're truly seen as a indispensable part of the whole force, and therefore society sees us as adding real value to UK defence and UK PLC. That's the Royal Auxiliary Air Force that I would like to see in 5 years.
Air Vice-Marshal Ranald Munro, thank you very much for sharing your vision for the RAF. Thank you for being on Inside Air.
No, thank you very much indeed for inviting me back again. Exciting times, and it's a very, very exciting time to be part of the RAF and to be an RAF Reserve.
This is Reheat for InsideAIR, where we take a look at some of the RAF stories you might have missed. I'm AS1 Emma Kerwin. The Royal Air Force has airdropped over 10 tonnes of feed supplies into Gaza. Aid, water, rice and baby formula were among the items parachuted in from an Atlas aircraft. It flew from Amman to drop the supplies. The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps says it's part of international efforts to provide life-saving assistance to civilians. Sticking with the Atlas, as one aircraft based at RAF Price Norton has flown to France, so its crew and ground support specialists could exchange skills with the French Air and Space Force. They trained together at Brissy Air Base in Orléans to improve how they operate and support each other in severe environments. The heavy lift aircraft showed its ability for agile combat employment. Ukrainian pilots have graduated from elementary flying training with the RAF, preparing them for advanced fast jet training. Instructors taught them general handling, instrument flying, low-level navigation and advanced formation flying. The Ukrainian pilots also undertook English language training. Chinnigs from RAF Odium relocated to RAF Shawbury for a 2-week exercise to practice operating from different locations. Flight Lieutenant Werler says this helps ensure the heavy lift helicopters are ready to fly and fight whenever and wherever required.
I'm one of the Chilling pilots on 18 Squadron at RAF Odium. So this deployment's absolutely essential for us as aircrew. Under the new Agile Combat Employment Model, it's all about getting away from a major operating base to being flexible and responsive and operating from many different standalone locations all at the same time.
And RAF personnel have been in Poland to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Great Escape, a multinational group of aviators who worked together to escape the Stalag Luft 3 prisoner of war camp. The anniversary is being commemorated with wreaths being laid across Europe in memory of the 50 prisoners of war who were murdered on their recapture. That was Reheat for InsideAIR.
I'm AS1 Ben Russell, and this is Under the Hat, where we get to know an aviator in less than a minute. Name you're known by.
Hello, I'm Corporal Orla Proctor.
What's your profession?
I'm a RAF copper based at RAF Hornington on No. 1 Tactical Policing and Security Squadron.
What's the best thing about your job?
Travelling around the world providing aviation security.
Hardest part of your job?
Definitely trying to communicate in countries where English is not their first language.
Best location you've served?
The best task and deployed on would be Op Polar Bear. Helping alongside the evacuation from Sudan, it was very rewarding.
What bit of luxury kit do you never deploy without?
A set of playing cards, because you never know when you're going to get a wee bit of time off.
And what's your proudest moment in the RAF?
The best part of my career was gaining my first cap and try in the UK Armed Forces rugby match for remembrance.
Thank you, Corporal Orla Proctor, for making this an arresting episode of Under the Hat.
That's all for this episode of Inside Air. Please give us a review and subscribe on your favourite podcast app, and join us again soon.
You've been listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations. If you're serving in the RAF and have a story for us, please speak to your unit media and communications officer. Inside Air is written and produced for the Royal Air Force by RAF Media Reserves.